The day my breakthrough discovery coincided with my divorce papers being finalized, I knew the universe had a twisted sense of humor. I stared at the petri dish under the microscope, my hands trembling as I processed what I was seeing. After 3 years of research, countless sleepless nights, and one devastating betrayal, I'd finally done it. My name is Michaela, and I'm a microbiologist who just discovered a potential treatment for an aggressive form of lymphoma. But 2 years ago, I was just Ethan's wife, the woman who supposedly couldn't handle his entrepreneurial spirit and visionary mindset. "Michaela, you need to see this!" Matteo burst into my lab waving his tablet. "The results from the second trial are even better than we expected." I looked up from my microscope, forcing myself to focus on the present. "Show me." He slid the tablet across my desk, his excitement palpable. "The cellular regeneration rate is unprecedented. This could be revolutionary." "I know." I smiled, but my phone buzzed, displaying my lawyer's name. "Give me a minute." Matteo nodded and stepped out. I answered the call, my heart racing. "It's done," my lawyer said. "The divorce is final. Ethan didn't contest any of the terms." Of course he didn't. He was too busy with Luna, his new girlfriend, and their shared vision for his company. The same company he'd built using my family's connections, the ones who'd chosen his side when everything fell apart. My sister Josephine's words still rang in my ears. "You're just jealous of his success, Michaela. He's building something amazing, and you're too focused on your little lab experiments to see it." Little lab experiments. I glanced at the groundbreaking results on my screen and let out a bitter laugh. "Michaela," Matteo poked his head back in, "the team's waiting for the briefing." I straightened my lab coat and followed him to the conference room. 6 eager faces looked up at me, ready to hear about our progress. This was my real family now, the ones who'd believed in me when everyone else hadn't. "Today," I began, "we've achieved something remarkable." As I presented our findings, my phone buzzed repeatedly. Text messages from Josephine. "Can we talk? It's about Ethan. Please, it's important." I ignored them all. After the presentation, Violet, our lead researcher, cornered me in the hallway. "You're distracted today. Everything okay?" Divorce papers came through. She squeezed my arm. "Want to grab dinner? Talk about it?" Actually, yes. I needed someone who understood. Someone who hadn't been charmed by Ethan's smooth talking and empty promises. At the small Italian restaurant around the corner, I finally let myself break down. "You know what's funny? He always said my work was a waste of time, that I should focus on supporting his dreams instead." Violet poured more wine. "Men like that can't stand when women outshine them. How's your family taking it? Still radio silent except for Josephine's texts today. Probably wants money." I stabbed at my pasta. "They all bought into his lies. Mum even remortgaged her house to invest in his company. And now? Now I have a breakthrough that could change lives, and they're not here to see it." I took a deep breath. But maybe that's for the best. My phone buzzed again. This time it was an email from our department head. "Urgent meeting tomorrow. Major pharmaceutical company interested in your research. Bring full documentation." Violet read the email over my shoulder and grinned. Now that's karma. "It's more than that." I felt a smile tugging at my lips. "It's validation." Later that night, alone in my apartment, I allowed myself to really feel it all. The triumph, the vindication, the lingering hurt. My laptop screen showed a news article about Ethan's company, promising revolutionary tech solutions. The comments section was full of investors asking questions about delayed products and missed deadlines. My phone buzzed one final time. A text from an unknown number. "Michaela, it's Luna. We need to talk about Ethan. Please." I deleted the message without responding and opened my research files instead. Tomorrow would be a big day, and I needed to be ready. Not for Ethan, not for my family, but for myself and the patients who could benefit from my work. As I reviewed my documentation, another email came through, this time from the pharmaceutical company itself. The numbers they were proposing made my head spin. More zeros than I'd ever seen. I thought about Ethan's face if he knew. About Josephine's dismissive words, about my mother's blind faith in the wrong person. But mostly I thought about the patients in our trials who were already showing improvement. That was the real victory. Not the revenge, not the money, but the lives we could save. I closed my laptop and smiled. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about proving them wrong by succeeding beyond their wildest expectations. 2 years flew by in a blur of clinical trials, research papers, and increasingly promising results. I was in the middle of reviewing our latest data when Matteo rushed into my office, his face flushed with excitement. "Have you seen the news?" He thrust his phone at me. "Your ex-husband's company is under investigation for fraud." I took the phone, scanning the headline. Tech startup under SEC investigation. Investors allege misuse of funds. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a little satisfied, I admitted, handing the phone back. A little? Matteo raised an eyebrow. The man nearly destroyed you, and now his house of cards is falling apart just as your treatment is about to hit the market. Before I could respond, Violet burst in. "Emergency meeting in the conference room. The FDA just fast-tracked our approval process." The next hour was a whirlwind of congratulations and planning. Our treatment had shown such promising results that the FDA was pushing it through at record speed. As I stood at the head of the conference table, outlining our next steps, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Finally, during a break, I checked it. 15 missed calls from Josephine, 10 from my mother, and several from numbers I didn't recognize. "Your family finally remembering you exist?" Violet asked, noticing my frown. Funny how that works, isn't it? I silenced my phone. 2 years of silence, and now they can't stop calling. Back in my office, I listened to one of Josephine's voicemails. "Michaela, please, you have to help us. Mom's about to lose everything. Ethan, he..." "Just call me back, okay?" "You're not actually going to call her back, are you?" Matteo asked from the doorway. "I don't know." I rubbed my temples. Part of me wants to ignore them like they ignored me, but you're not them, he finished. That's why you're succeeding while they're failing. My computer pinged with a new email, another major hospital wanting to participate in our trials. The contrast between my rising success and Ethan's collapse wasn't lost on me. "Dr. Warner?" My assistant poked her head in. "There's someone here to see you. Says she's your sister." I exchanged looks with Matteo. "Send her in." Josephine looked nothing like the polished, confident woman who told me I was jealous and small-minded 2 years ago. Her designer clothes were wrinkled, her makeup smudged. "5 minutes," I said, gesturing to a chair. "Michaela, She started, then burst into tears. "Everything's falling apart. Ethan's company. It was all fake. The technology never worked. He used Mom's money, my money, everyone's money. And now you need my help?" I kept my voice neutral. "Your treatment. It's worth millions. The patents alone could save us. Mom's going to lose her house, and I had to pull my kids out of private school and..." "Stop." I held up my hand. "Let me get this straight. You're here because you want me to use my success. The work you called a waste of time, to bail out Ethan." "Not Ethan," she protested. "Mom, me, the kids. Please, Michaela." Matteo cleared his throat. "I'll give you some privacy." After he left, I leaned back in my chair. Where was this concern for family when Ethan was spreading lies about me? When you all cut me out? "I was wrong," Josephine whispered. "We were all wrong. I'm so sorry." My phone buzzed again. Another hospital CEO wanting to discuss implementation. The irony wasn't lost on me. "I need time to think," I said finally. "This isn't just about money. There are patients counting on this treatment." "I understand." Josephine stood, wiping her eyes. "But please, just think about Mom." After she left, Violet found me staring out my office window. "You okay? Did you know our treatment could help lymphoma patients increase their survival rate by 60%? I turned to face her. "That's not just numbers. That's people getting to see their kids grow up. And now your family wants to use that to fix their mistakes." "Exactly." I picked up a photo from my desk. Me with my research team, all of us grinning after our first successful trial. They chose Ethan's empty promises over my real work. Now they want me to compromise that work to save them. My phone buzzed yet again. This time it was Ethan's number. "Don't answer it," Violet warned. "I won't." I declined the call. "But I need to figure out what to do about all this." "You don't owe them anything," she reminded me. "I know." I looked at the latest trial results on my screen. But this treatment isn't about revenge, it's about helping people. As if on cue, my assistant appeared again. "Dr. Warner, the parents of one of our trial patients are here. They want to thank you personally." I stood up, straightening my lab coat. "Send them in. This is what really matters." But as I prepared to meet them, Ethan's text flashed on my phone. "We need to talk. Everything's not what it seems. Please." I turned my phone face down. Whatever drama Ethan and my family were involved in would have to wait. I had lives to save first. The next morning I arrived at work to find my mother sitting in my office. She looked older, more worn than I remembered, her usually perfect hair showing streaks of grey. "How did you get in here?" I asked, setting down my coffee. "Your assistant." I told her I was your mother. She stood, wringing her hands. "Michaela, we need to talk about what's happening." "What's happening is I have a meeting in 20 minutes with the hospital board." I checked my watch. "So, make it quick." "Josephine told me she came to see you yesterday." She took a shaky breath. "There's more you need to know. Ethan. He didn't just take our money. He took everything." Matteo appeared in the doorway, folders in hand, but stopped when he saw my mother. I waved him in. "Whatever you need to say, you can say in front of Matteo. He's been here for me when my family wasn't." My mother flinched but continued. "The FBI is investigating him. They're saying he ran a Ponzi scheme, that none of the technology ever existed. He used new investor money to pay old investors, and when that dried up, he moved on to family money," I finished. "I'm not surprised. That's what con men do." "Your father's pension," she whispered. "Our savings, the house, even your cousin's college fund. We all believed in him." "No," I corrected her. "You all believed him over me. There's a difference." Matteo cleared his throat. "Dr. Warner, the board is gathering early." "I'll be right there." I turned back to my mother. "I have to go." "Please." She grabbed my arm. "Just look at this first." She handed me a stack of papers, bank statements, legal notices, foreclosure warnings. My stomach turned as I saw the numbers. "Mom, I can't." "Your treatment," she interrupted. "The pharmaceutical companies are offering millions. We could make this right." "Make this right?" I laughed bitterly. "You want me to use my life's work, the work you all dismissed, to fix Ethan's crimes?" "To help your family," she pleaded. Before I could respond, Violet burst in. "Michaela, you need to see this now." She turned on the office TV. Ethan's face filled the screen, standing outside a courthouse. He looked haggard, his usual confident smile replaced by desperation. "I maintain my innocence," he was saying to reporters. "These allegations are false. Our technology works. We just need more time." "Turn it off," I said quietly. My mother was crying now. "He told us he had buyers lined up. Major companies ready to invest billions. Like the way he told everyone I was unstable, that I was sabotaging his work out of jealousy." I gathered my files for the board meeting. "I have to go." "Michaela, please." "I'll think about it," I said, not looking at her. "But right now I have actual work to do." The board meeting was a triumph. Our treatment success rates were unprecedented, and the pharmaceutical company was increasing their offer. As I presented the latest data, I could feel my future solidifying. Speaking engagements, research grants, worldwide implementation. Afterward, Matteo found me in the lab. "Your mother's still here." "Of course she is." I adjusted my microscope. "Did she tell you how she took Ethan's side during the divorce? How she told me I was being childish and jealous?" "She mentioned it." He sat beside me. "She also showed me the foreclosure notice. It's bad, Michaela." "I know." I pushed away from the microscope. "But this treatment, it's not just about money. We're saving lives. And you can keep saving lives while helping your family, he said gently. The two aren't mutually exclusive. My phone buzzed. A text from Luna. They're freezing all his assets. Even my apartment, please talk to him. It's spreading, I muttered. Like a virus. Violet appeared with more news. Ethan's business partner just turned state's evidence. It's all over the financial news. I pulled up the article on my computer. The scope of Ethan's fraud was staggering. Hundreds of millions in investor money, all built on lies and false promises. Your name isn't mentioned anywhere, Violet noted. Small mercies, I closed the browser, but my family's will be soon enough. My mother appeared in the doorway again, looking smaller than ever. The FBI wants to interview me tomorrow. They're saying we might be held liable, that we should have known. I stood up, suddenly tired. Go home, Mom. I'll come by tonight. We'll talk about options. After she left, Violet touched my arm. You're not responsible for fixing this. No, I agreed, but I might be responsible for what happens next. My phone lit up with another text, this time from Josephine. Mom told me you'll help. Thank you. I know we don't deserve it. I didn't respond. Instead, I looked at the latest patient photos on my wall. People smiling, living, surviving because of our work. Whatever I decided, I couldn't let Ethan's lies taint that truth. Schedule a meeting with the lawyers, I told Violet. If we're going to do this, we're doing it my way. You want to do what? Matteo stared at me across the conference room table, his coffee forgotten. Set up a separate foundation, I repeated, spreading out the draft documents our lawyers had prepared. The pharmaceutical deal money goes into research and patient assistance. A portion gets allocated to help fraud victims, including my family, but not exclusively. Violet leaned forward. You're turning your revenge into a rescue mission? More like turning poison into medicine. I smiled grimly. Isn't that what we do anyway? Before anyone could respond, my assistant interrupted. Dr. Warner, Ethan's here. The room fell silent. I hadn't seen him in person since the divorce. Should we call security? Matteo asked, half rising. No, I stood up. I need to handle this. Ethan waited in my office, looking expensive even in distress. His suit was perfectly tailored, but his eyes were haunted. You look well, Michaela, he said softly. Success suits you. What do you want, Ethan? He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I once found endearing. I need your help, but not the way you think. The way I think is that you're facing federal charges and trying to drag my family down with you. It's more complicated than that. He pulled out his phone, showing me an email. There are people, powerful investors. They're willing to make this all go away if we can show them working technology. I laughed. And you want what? To pretend my treatment is part of your company's portfolio? Think about it, he leaned forward. Your research, my connections, we could help everyone. Your family, my investors, the patients. Stop. I held up my hand. Just stop. You haven't changed at all, have you? Still trying to use other people's work to cover your lies. I made mistakes, he admitted, but people will lose everything. Your mother, Josephine, even Luna. Don't. My voice sharpened. Don't pretend you care about them. You used them, just like you used me. A knock at the door revealed Violet. Everything okay in here? Fine. I didn't take my eyes off Ethan. He was just leaving. Michaela, please, his voice cracked. I know I hurt you, but this is bigger than us. You're right about that. I walked to my office door and opened it, which is why I'm handling it my way. After he left, I called an emergency meeting with my team and the lawyers. The conference room filled quickly, everyone sensing the importance. Here's what we're going to do, I announced, distributing folders. The foundation will operate independently from the pharmaceutical deal. Complete transparency, ethical oversight, no room for manipulation. What about your family? Matteo asked. They'll have to apply like anyone else affected by the fraud. No special treatment. The lawyers nodded approvingly. One spoke up. This protects you and your research while still providing aid. It's elegant. It's fair, I corrected. Something Ethan never understood. My phone buzzed. Josephine again. Just saw Ethan leaving your building. What did he want? I ignored it and focused on the meeting. We spent hours hammering out details, ensuring everything was airtight. By evening, we had a solid plan. You're doing the right thing, Violet said as we packed up, even if it's not the easy thing. Nothing about this has been easy. I gathered my papers, but I won't let Ethan turn my work into another one of his schemes. At home that night, I finally called Josephine back. Ethan tried to convince me to help him fake technology for his investors, I told her. Oh God, she sounded sick. And I'm setting up a foundation instead. You'll get information about applying for assistance soon. Applying? Her voice rose. Michaela, we're family. Exactly. Which is why you'll understand that I have to do this right. After hanging up, I opened my laptop to find an email from Luna. Whatever Ethan told you today, please know some of us were victims too. I never knew. I closed the email without responding. My screen showed a news alert. FBI expands investigation into tech startup fraud. Multiple conspirators suspected. My phone rang. My mother this time. I heard about your foundation idea, she said quietly. It's good, Michaela. It's what you always were, someone who helps people. Even when those people hurt me, I asked. Especially then, she paused. I'm sorry we didn't see it sooner. I looked at the patient photos on my wall, then at the foundation documents on my desk. Mom, I need you to understand something. This isn't forgiveness. This is justice for everyone involved. I understand. Her voice was small. Thank you for not abandoning us completely. After we hung up, I texted Matteo. Meeting tomorrow at 8. Time to put this plan in motion. His response came quickly. You're doing something extraordinary here, don't forget that. I smiled, thinking how different this felt from revenge. This was something better, something healing. The foundation's launch event was set for Friday evening at the city's main hospital. I stood at the podium adjusting my notes when I spotted Ethan slipping into the back of the auditorium. He's got some nerve, Matteo muttered beside me. Let him stay, I said. He should see this. The room filled quickly. Medical professionals, investors, media, and victims of Ethan's fraud. My mother and Josephine sat in the middle, looking uncomfortable in their dated business attire. Luna hovered near the exit, her designer clothes a stark contrast to her anxious expression. Ready? Violet squeezed my arm. I nodded and stepped up to the microphone. Good evening. I'm Dr. Michaela Warner, and today we're announcing something unprecedented in medical research. As I outlined the Foundation's dual mission, advancing treatment accessibility while providing restitution to fraud victims, I watched Ethan's face. His expression shifted from hope to confusion to something like fear. Every dollar of fraud victims' money that went into false promises, I continued, will be matched by our foundation for real medical advancement. We're turning empty words into actual healing. The audience stirred. I saw my mother wipe her eyes. Applications for assistance open next week, I explained. Every claim will be evaluated fairly regardless of personal connections or past relationships. Ethan stood up, moving toward the podium. Security tensed, but I held up my hand. Dr. Warner, he called out, his voice carrying across the room. May I ask a question? The audience turned to stare at him. Some recognized him from the news coverage. Of course, I said calmly. Transparency is one of our core values. This foundation, he said, it's using the pharmaceutical company's payment for your treatment, isn't it? Money that could have gone to you personally? Yes, I met his gaze. Because unlike some people, I believe success comes with responsibility. A reporter raised her hand. Dr. Warner, is it true that the man asking questions is your ex-husband currently under federal investigation? Yes, I answered. And his question highlights exactly why this foundation is necessary. While some people built empires on lies, we're building something real on truth. Ethan's face reddened. Michaela, please. We need to talk privately. No, we don't. I gestured to the presentation screen behind me, showing patient recovery statistics. These numbers are what matter. Real results, real hope. He took another step forward. You're doing this to punish me. Actually, Violet stood up. She's doing this to help people, including those you hurt. Now please sit down or leave. The room buzzed with whispers. I saw phones recording everything. The Foundation's first initiative, I continued, ignoring Ethan, will fund treatment for 50 lymphoma patients who couldn't otherwise afford it. Their lives matter more than any revenge. Applause broke out. Ethan slumped in his seat, finally silent. After the presentation during the reception, my mother approached me. I saw the application forms, she said quietly. They're thorough. They have to be. I sipped my water. Everyone gets treated equally. Even family? Especially family. I watched Josephine across the room talking to one of the Foundation's lawyers. It's the only way this works. Luna appeared next, looking nervous. Can we talk? I led her to a quiet corner. She pulled out her phone, showing me emails. Ethan's been moving money, she said. Hidden accounts. He told me it was normal business practice, but after your speech tonight... You should take those to the FBI, I said gently. I already did. She straightened her shoulders. I'm done protecting him. Across the room, Ethan watched us, his face pale. When he started walking over, Matteo stepped between us. I think you've done enough damage, he told Ethan. This isn't over, Ethan hissed, but security was already approaching. As they escorted him out, I heard him call back. You'll regret this, Michaela. You can't play saint forever. Violet appeared at my side. You okay? Better than okay. I watched the doors close behind him. For the first time, I feel completely free. The evening wound down with more interviews, handshakes, and photographs. My team beamed with pride as reporters asked about our research breakthroughs. Finally, as the last guests left, Josephine lingered. I'll help, she said suddenly. With the Foundation. Processing applications, whatever you need, I want to make things right. I studied her face, seeing genuine remorse. There's a lot of work to do. I know, she smiled sadly. But you showed me what real success looks like. It's not what Ethan promised. It's what you built. As I drove home that night, my phone buzzed with messages of support and media requests. But one text from Matteo stood out. You didn't just beat him. You showed everyone a better way. That's the best revenge. I smiled, thinking of the patients who would benefit, the victims who would find justice, and the family that might finally learn from their mistakes. Tomorrow would bring more work, more challenges, more healing. But tonight, I had peace knowing I'd chosen the right path. Not the easiest one, but the one that would help the most people. The first round of Foundation applications is overwhelming, Josephine said, spreading papers across my office desk. Over 300 victims so far, and more coming in. I looked up from my microscope. 3 weeks had passed since the launch, and my sister had thrown herself into the Foundation work with surprising dedication. Any familiar names? I asked. Too many. She held up a stack. Half our extended family, most of Dad's golf club, even my kid's former piano teacher. Matteo knocked and entered with fresh coffee. The FBI's here again. They want to talk about the offshore accounts Luna revealed. Send them in. I stood, straightening my lab coat. Josephine, would you... Stay, she interrupted. I should tell them what I know too. 2 agents entered, the same ones who'd interviewed me last week. They looked grimmer than before. Dr. Warner, the female agent began, we've uncovered something disturbing. Your ex-husband wasn't just running a Ponzi scheme. He was selling medical research data. My stomach dropped. What kind of data? Early versions of your treatment research. She pulled out some documents. We found emails where he claimed to have proprietary medical breakthroughs. That's impossible, I breathed. That research never left the lab. Unless, Josephine said quietly, he took it during your marriage. The memory hit me. Ethan, always so interested in my work, asking questions, photographing my notes to understand my passion better. We'll need access to your original research files, the male agent said. To compare with what he sold? Of course. I turned to Matteo. Get them everything. After the agents left, Violet rushed in. You need to see the news. On my office TV, Ethan was being led out of his company building in handcuffs. The crawler beneath read, "Tech CEO arrested. Medical data theft added to charges." "He's really done it now," Josephine whispered. "Stealing medical research? That's federal prison time." My phone buzzed. Luna again. "They're questioning everyone. Your mother's at the FBI office now." "Go," Matteo told me. "We'll handle things here." At the FBI office, I found my mother in tears. "I didn't know," she kept saying. "He asked me to invest in medical technology. I thought he was supporting your work." "Mrs. Warner," the agent said gently, "did your son-in-law ever show you any research documents?" "Yes." She wiped her eyes. "He said they were breakthrough treatments, that Michaela was part of it all." I felt sick. "Mum, I never gave him permission to share my work." "I know that now." She reached for my hand. "I'm so sorry, honey. We were all so blind." Back at the lab, Violet had news. "The pharmaceutical company wants to make a statement supporting you. They're doubling their commitment to the foundation." "Good." I sat heavily in my chair. "Because we're going to need it, those stolen research files. Who knows how many people invested based on them?" Josephine, who'd followed me back, spoke up. "I have an idea. What if we expand the foundation's scope? Not just financial help, but a whole program to educate people about scientific integrity and investment fraud." I looked at my sister. Really looked at her. The entitled woman who'd dismissed my work was gone, replaced by someone who finally understood value beyond money. "Actually," I said, "that's brilliant." We worked late into the night, revising the foundation's mission. Matteo ordered dinner, and even my mother stayed, helping organize victim statements. Around midnight, my phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. "Your research saved my daughter's life. I invested in Ethan's company because I believed in that kind of miracle. I'm sorry it wasn't real, but thank you for making the real thing happen." I showed it to the others. "This is why we do this." "No," Violet corrected. "This is why you do this. You took something painful and made it healing." My mother touched my arm. "I keep thinking about all those board meetings at Ethan's company. The way he'd talk about medical breakthroughs, and I'd sit there feeling so proud. I never once asked why you weren't involved." "Because he was good at telling people what they wanted to hear," I said. "But now we're showing them what's real." Josephine looked up from her stack of applications. "Speaking of real, we should probably talk about my application. I know you said no special treatment, but nothing." I took the paper from her. "You'll go through the same process as everyone else. That's how we maintain integrity." She nodded, and I saw respect in her eyes, maybe for the first time. My phone buzzed again. The FBI. "Need you in court tomorrow, Ethan's arraignment." "I'll go with you," Matteo offered. "We all will," Violet added. I looked around my office, at my sister organizing papers, my mother finally understanding my work, my team standing by me. This wasn't the family I'd imagined having, but it was the one I'd built. "Tomorrow, then," I said. "We face him together." The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters when we arrived. Ethan's arrest had become national news, a cautionary tale of tech fraud meeting medical ethics. "Dr. Warner," they called out, "how does it feel knowing your ex-husband stole your research?" Before I could respond, Matteo stepped forward. "Dr. Warner will make a statement after the arraignment." Inside, the courtroom was packed. Luna sat in the front row, her designer clothes replaced by a simple black suit. She nodded slightly as we passed. "All rise," the bailiff called. Ethan entered in an orange jumpsuit, handcuffed, looking nothing like the confident man who'd once dismissed my work as just lab stuff. His eyes found mine, pleading. The charges were red: wire fraud, securities fraud, theft of intellectual property, conspiracy to commit fraud. The list went on. "How does the defendant plead?" the judge asked. Ethan's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, my client wishes to make a statement." "This should be good," Violet whispered beside me. "Your Honor," Ethan began, his voice shaking. "I admit I made mistakes, but everything I did was to create something meaningful. Dr. Warner's research. I only shared it because I believed in its potential. I felt my mother stiffen beside me. The defendant will enter a plea, the judge interrupted. Not guilty, Ethan said, then turned to face me. Michaela, please, tell them we were building something together. I stood up. Your Honor, may I speak? The judge nodded. Mr. Harding never had permission to use my research. While he was telling investors about medical breakthroughs, I was actually creating them. In my lab, with my team. He didn't believe in potential. He believed in profit. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Ethan's face reddened. Order, the judge called. Mr. Harding, given the severity of the charges and the flight risk, bail is denied. As they led Ethan away, Luna approached me. The FBI found more accounts. He was planning to flee to a non-extradition country. Of course he was, I said. He never faced consequences before. Outside, the media waited. This time, I was ready. Dr. Warner, a reporter called, what would you say to other scientists worried about their research being stolen? I'd say that truth prevails. I gestured to my team. Real breakthroughs happen in labs, not boardrooms. Real healing comes from dedication, not deception. And what about the foundation? Another asked. The foundation continues its work. Today we're announcing full funding for another 100 lymphoma patients, plus educational programs about scientific integrity. Josephine stepped forward. As someone who invested in the fraud, I can say the foundation isn't just about money. It's about rebuilding trust. Back at the lab, celebrations were in order. Our treatment had just received final FDA approval, and the first round of foundation grants was ready. Look at this, Violet said, showing me her tablet. Our story was trending. Medical breakthrough triumphs over tech fraud. The pharmaceutical company's stock is soaring, Matteo added. They're calling it the integrity bump. My mother appeared with coffee for everyone. She'd been volunteering at the foundation, learning about real medical research. I spoke to Dad, she said quietly. He's finally ready to talk. Seeing Ethan in court, it opened his eyes. Speaking of opening eyes, Josephine called from my computer, you need to see these application responses. She pulled up emails from fraud victims. Not angry demands for money, but thoughtful reflections on lessons learned. Many asked to join our educational programs. We're changing the narrative, I realized. It's not just about losing money anymore. It's about understanding value. Luna appeared in my doorway. The prosecutors want to meet tomorrow. They're offering a deal, but they need your input. No deals, I said firmly. He needs to face everything he did. Agreed. She handed me a flash drive. Here's everything I found in his private files. He kept detailed notes about how he used your research. Called it his insurance policy. I took the drive, feeling its weight. Thank you for coming forward. Thank you for showing me what integrity looks like, she replied. That evening, as my team celebrated our FDA approval, I watched them all. Matteo arranging patient schedules, Violet explaining the treatment to new doctors, Josephine helping fraud victims understand the application process, my mother learning the difference between real research and empty promises. My phone buzzed with a message from Ethan's lawyer. He wants to make a deal. Says he'll reveal everything about the fraud if you support leniency. I showed it to Violet, who scoffed, still trying to manipulate his way out. Not this time, I said, deleting the message. The lab's TV showed Ethan's company building being raided by federal agents. But across the street, our foundation's new educational center was opening its doors. Dr. Warner, my assistant appeared. The first round of funded patients is here for treatment. I stood, straightening my lab coat. This was real success, not revenge, not vindication, but actual healing. As I headed to meet the patients, I caught my reflection in the window. I barely recognized the woman who'd once doubted her worth in Ethan's shadow. She was gone, replaced by someone who knew exactly who she was and what she could do. The morning of Ethan's sentencing, I stood at my lab window watching the sunrise paint the city gold. My phone buzzed with a text from Matteo. Court in an hour, ready? Before I could respond, Josephine rushed in. You need to see this. She handed me her tablet, showing an email from Ethan. He'd sent it to everyone he'd ever contacted about his fraudulent company. Today, I face sentencing for my crimes. But first, I owe you all the truth. The medical breakthroughs I promised weren't mine to promise. They belonged to my ex-wife, Dr. Michaela Warner. While I sold lies, she created genuine healing. The foundation she built from the ashes of my fraud represents everything I pretended to be but never was. He actually admitted it, I whispered. There's more, Josephine said. Look at the responses. Hundreds of replies flooded in, from investors, victims, even former employees. Not angry accusations, but messages of support for the foundation's work. Violet appeared with coffee. The pharmaceutical company saw the email. They're tripling their funding commitment. And the patient waiting list? I asked. We can help them all now, she smiled. Every single one. In the courthouse, Ethan stood before the judge in his orange jumpsuit, shoulders slumped. Before sentencing, the judge said, Dr. Warner has requested to speak. I walked to the podium, feeling everyone's eyes. Your Honor, when my ex-husband stole my research, he didn't just commit fraud. He betrayed the trust of people hoping for healing. But something unexpected happened. His crimes led to the creation of a foundation that's now helping more people than his false promises ever could. I turned to face Ethan directly. You taught me something important, I continued. Success isn't about winning or revenge. It's about turning damage into healing. The judge nodded. Mr. Harding, you've pled guilty to all charges. Given the scope of your fraud and the theft of medical research, I sentence you to 15 years in federal prison. As they led him away, Ethan caught my eye. I'm sorry, he mouthed. Outside, my mother waited with news. Dad's here. He wants to help with the Foundation's education program. Says he can teach others about the warning signs he missed. Before I could respond, Luna approached. The FBI finished tracking the money. With what they've recovered, plus the pharmaceutical funding, the Foundation can expand globally. Speaking of global, Matteo said, checking his phone, the World Health Organization wants you to speak about medical ethics and fraud prevention. I looked at my assembled family, not just blood relatives, but the people who'd stood by me through everything. Violet organizing patient care, Matteo protecting our research, Josephine rebuilding trust, my parents finally understanding real value. Dr. Warner? A young woman approached, holding a little girl's hand. My daughter was in your first treatment group. I wanted you to see. The girl smiled, healthy and bright. I'm going back to school next week. This, I told my team, this is what real success looks like. Back at the lab, we gathered for an impromptu celebration. The TV showed coverage of Ethan's sentencing, but nobody watched. We were too busy reviewing patient progress reports. Remember when he said your work was just lab stuff? Violet asked, pouring champagne. Now it's saving lives, Matteo added. My phone buzzed. A message from the pharmaceutical company. Treatment approval in 27 new countries. Foundation offices opening next month. Josephine looked up from her stack of applications. You know what's amazing? People aren't just asking for help anymore. They're asking how they can contribute. Because you showed them how, my mother said. You turned your pain into purpose. We all did, I corrected her. Every person in this room chose truth over lies, healing over hurt. The lab door opened, and my father walked in for the first time. He stood awkwardly, taking in the research displays, the patient photos, the Foundation's mission statement on the wall. I was wrong, he said simply, about everything. Show me how I can help make it right. I handed him a Foundation volunteer badge. Welcome to the team. As evening fell, I walked through the lab one last time before heading home. The microscopes that once represented lonely nights now showed breakthrough discoveries. The office where I'd received divorce papers now housed healing plans for thousands. My phone lit up with a final message from Ethan's prison email. You did what I never could. You built something real. I hope someday you can forgive me. I didn't respond. Instead, I texted my team. Tomorrow we start helping patients in 3 new countries. Better get some rest. Looking out at the city lights, I smiled. This wasn't the ending I'd expected when my marriage collapsed, when my family chose sides, when my work was stolen. It was better. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about getting better, building bigger, healing harder. And sometimes, the family you rebuild is stronger than the one you lost. I turned off my office light and headed out, ready for tomorrow's challenges. After all, real success stories don't end, they just keep growing.
Tom, did you ever think we'd end up here? I mused, glancing around our living room. The walls still smelled of fresh paint, and our furniture, a mix of old and new, gave the place a feeling of warmth. Tom, sprawled on the couch after a long day, smiled. Honestly, Anna, I always hoped for something like this, but never really believed it. He had a way of saying things, simple, honest. That's one of the things I loved about him. I sat down next to him, still marveling at our good fortune. This house, it's more than I ever dreamed of. Your grandma would be proud of you, making a life like this. He nodded, his eyes reflecting a mix of emotions. Yeah, she was the only good thing in my childhood. After Dad died and Mom, I did know. Tom's mom was a topic we rarely touched. She lost her rights to him after years of neglect and worse. Tom grew up tough, decided not to be like his folks. He worked hard, got himself through college, and became an engineer. Me, I'm a lawyer, came from a simpler, less dramatic background. We met at a mutual friend's party and, the rest is history. So, what do you think about inviting my parents over for dinner this weekend? I asked, changing the subject. His family history was tough, and I didn't want to dwell on it. Tom chuckled. Your mom's cooking or yours? Hey, I'll have you know I've been practicing, I retorted with a playful nudge. Practice makes perfect, babe. But maybe keep the fire extinguisher handy, just in case, he teased, dodging my mock swat. We laughed, and at that moment, I felt a wave of contentment wash over me. We had our struggles, but we were building something beautiful together. Suddenly, the doorbell rang, slicing through our tranquility. Tom raised an eyebrow. Expecting anyone? No, I replied, puzzled. It's probably just a neighbor or a salesperson. I opened the door, and there stood a woman, probably in her late 50s, but life had clearly been rough on her. Beside her was a man with a look that didn't exactly scream, friendly neighbor. The woman's eyes darted past me, surveying the inside of our home. Well, aren't you going to invite your mother in, Thomas? Tom's face went pale as he stood up. Mom? What are you doing here? I glanced at Tom, my mind racing. This was the woman he hadn't seen in years, the cause of so much of his pain. The air suddenly felt heavy, charged with a tension that had no place in our new beginning. The woman at our door, Tom's mother, had a hard look in her eyes, like she'd seen too much and cared too little. The man next to her, he just looked tough, like trouble. Tommy, aren't you going to say hello to your ma? She said, her voice raspy, probably from years of smoking. Tom stood frozen for a moment before managing, Hello, Mom. It's been a long time. I could see he was struggling, torn between politeness and old, deep wounds. I stepped up. I'm Anna, Tom's wife. Can we help you with something? She looked me over, her gaze sharp. Oh, so you're the one who snatched up my Tommy. Nice place you got here, she said, pushing past me into the house. The man followed without a word, his presence filling the room uncomfortably. Tom and I exchanged a look, his saying, I'm sorry, and mine saying, it's not your fault. We followed them into the living room. So, Mom, what brings you here? Tom asked, his voice steady, but I could hear the underlying tension. She plopped down on our sofa, making herself at home. Well, Tommy, life's been hard. Your ma's had a tough time. Lost my place, nowhere to go. Figured my son would help me out, you know? The man, still silent, just nodded along. I was floored. This was the woman who had neglected Tom, and now she was here, expecting help? I'm sorry to hear that, but Tom's life hasn't been easy either, you know, I said, a bit more sharply than I intended. Tom shot me a warning glance, but I was past caring. This woman had some nerve. Tom's mom laughed, a harsh sound. Oh, I know all about my Tommy's tough life. But he's got it good now, right? A fancy house, a pretty wife. Time to give back to his dear old mom. The man finally spoke up, his voice gruff. Yeah, we just need a place to crash for a bit, get back on our feet. I felt my anger rising. A place to crash? You can't just show up and expect to. Tom cut me off. Anna, let's talk about this outside. He led me to the kitchen, away from the unwanted guests. Anna, I know this is messed up, but I can't just turn her away. She's my mom. Your mom who abandoned you, Tom. I hissed. She can't just waltz in here and take over our lives. Tom ran his hands through his hair, a sure sign he was stressed. I know. But what if we help her find a place, just temporarily? Get her off our backs. I stared at him, incredulous. And what? We're supposed to pay for it. Tom, she's using you. He looked down, defeated. I just don't want any trouble, Anna. Maybe if we help her now, she'll leave us alone later. We went back to the living room, where his mom was making herself a bit too comfortable. Mom, we'll help you find a place, but you can't stay here, Tom said, more firmly than I expected. She looked like she was about to argue, but then shrugged. Fine, as long as you're paying. Can't say no to free rent, right? Tom nodded, and I felt a knot form in my stomach. This was far from over. We found a small, cheap apartment for Tom's mom and her partner, thinking this would be a temporary fix. But a week later, Tom's phone rang, and I could tell from his face it was her. Hey, Mom, what's up? Tom's voice had that forced cheerfulness he used when he was uncomfortable. I couldn't hear her words, but the tone was unmistakable, demanding, whiny. Tom's face fell as he listened. Yeah, I understand money's tight, Tom said, trying to keep his voice even. But we already paid this month's rent and... I watched as he ran his other hand through his hair, a sure sign he was stressed. He listened for a few more minutes, his expression growing more strained. Okay, I'll see what I can do, he finally said, sounding defeated. He hung up and looked at me, his face a mix of frustration and guilt. She needs money for groceries, bills, says they can't find jobs, Tom explained, sounding exhausted. I felt a surge of anger. Tom, we can't keep doing this. She's taking advantage of you. He sighed, looking torn. I know, but what else can I do? She's my mom. I shook my head, feeling helpless. Fine, but this is the last time. You need to tell her that. Tom nodded and went to get his checkbook. I couldn't believe we were dipping into our savings for her. It just didn't feel right. The next couple of weeks were quiet, and I foolishly hoped things had settled down. But then, one evening, Tom came home looking more stressed than ever. What's wrong? I asked, concerned. It's my mom. She and her partner got kicked out of the apartment. What? Why? I was shocked but not entirely surprised. They were caught drinking and making a scene. The landlord's fed up. They've got nowhere to go, Tom explained, rubbing his forehead. I was furious. So what now? They expect us to take them in? Tom looked helpless. I don't know, Anna. She's saying they'll be on the streets. I couldn't believe this was happening. Tom, you can't let her walk all over you. She's manipulating you. He knew I was right, but he was still torn. I can't leave her homeless, Anna. I felt trapped in an impossible situation. We argued back and forth, neither of us wanting to give in. In the end, we agreed to let them stay for a couple of nights, just until they found another place. That evening, when Tom's mom and her partner arrived with their bags, I felt like our home was being invaded. "Thanks for letting us crash here, Tommy," his mom said, looking around our living room like she owned the place. Her partner just grunted, dropping his bags on the floor. I forced a smile. "It's just for a couple of nights, right?" She waved her hand dismissively. Yeah, just until we sort things out." I didn't believe her for a second. As they settled in, making themselves a little too comfortable, I felt a knot of anxiety in my stomach. This was far from over, and I had a bad feeling about where it was all heading. The couple of nights quickly turned into a week, and Tom's mom, Marlene, and her partner, Ray, made themselves at home in the worst possible way. They were loud, messy, and had no respect for our space. But things came to a head one Tuesday evening. I came home from work to find Marlene rummaging through my dresser. My heart raced, and anger bubbled up inside me. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I demanded, storming into the room. Marlene jumped, caught off guard. "Just looking for a scarf or something, it's chilly in here," she said nonchalantly, but I saw the lie in her eyes. "That's my personal stuff. You have no right." I was shaking with rage. Marlene rolled her eyes. "Relax, I wasn't going to take anything. Just borrowing, that's all." I grabbed the scarf from her hands. "This is not a free-for-all, Marlene. You need to respect our privacy." Tom walked in just then, catching the tail end of our argument. "What's going on here?" "Your wife's flipping out because I borrowed a scarf," Marlene said, playing the victim. Tom looked at me, then at his mom, torn. "Mom, you should have asked first. Anna's right." Marlene huffed, muttering something under her breath as she left the room. Tom gave me an apologetic look. "I'm sorry, Anna. I'll talk to her." But it was clear talking wasn't going to solve anything. Marlene and Ray continued to overstep their boundaries. They left dirty dishes everywhere, smoked inside the house despite our no-smoking rule, and the TV was always blaring. One evening, I found Ray lounging on our couch, beer cans littered around him. The TV was so loud I could hear it from the driveway. "Can you turn that down? It's way too loud," I said, reaching for the remote. Ray grabbed it before I could. "I was watching that. It's our house, our TV. You need to respect our rules," I shot back, frustration mounting. Ray just smirked. "Your house, huh? Seems like it's Tommy's mom's house now." I was at my breaking point. "Tom, we need to talk. Now." Tom came in, looking exhausted. "What's up?" "Your mom and Ray, they're walking all over us." "This can't go on," I said, my voice shaking with anger. Tom ran his hand through his hair, a sign that he was stressed. I know. I'll find them another place tomorrow. I promise." But as I looked around at the mess, the blaring TV, and the strangers who had invaded our home, I wondered if it was a promise he could keep. The days following Marlene and Ray's departure were a cautious return to normalcy. Tom and I were slowly reclaiming our space, our peace. But that fragile sense of security shattered, quite literally, one afternoon. I was in the garden, pulling weeds and trying to clear my head, when Mr. Jenkins, our next-door neighbor, called out to me from his yard. He's an older man, always friendly, but today he looked concerned. "Anna," he said, his voice carrying a note of urgency. "I've been meaning to talk to you. Saw something odd the other day." I straightened up, brushing dirt off my hands. "What's up, Mr. Jenkins?" He hesitated, then said, "It's about your house. I saw a woman, your mother-in-law I think, letting herself in while you and Tom were out. Thought you should know." My heart sank. "She was here? In our house?" He nodded solemnly. "Yeah, she had a key or something. Just thought it was strange, is all." Thanking Mr. Jenkins, I hurried inside to find Tom. "Tom, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Mr. Jenkins saw Marlene entering our house when we weren't here. We need to change the locks. Tom's face hardened. Let's do it. Now. We called a locksmith and had all the locks changed that day. It felt like a small victory, a reclaiming of our boundaries. But the sense of violation lingered, unsettling and raw. A few days later, our newfound peace was shattered again. I came home from work to find our front windows broken, glass strewn across the living room floor. My heart raced with anger and fear. Tom arrived soon after and was equally shocked. Who would do this? He asked, though I could tell he already suspected the answer. I pulled out my phone and dialed Marlene's number. She answered on the third ring, her voice smug and unapologetic. Hello, Anna. Something you want? She sneered. You know why I'm calling. The windows, Marlene. Did you do this? I demanded, my voice shaking with anger. Her laugh was cold, devoid of remorse. Oh, honey, you can't prove a thing. But let's just say you should be more generous with your money. Things might get worse otherwise. I felt a chill run down my spine. Is that a threat, Marlene? Take it as you like, she replied, her voice dripping with malice. I ended the call, my hands trembling. Tom looked at me, his expression a mix of rage and helplessness. What did she say? She basically threatened us. Said we should give her money, or things could get worse, I replied, trying to keep my composure. Tom clenched his fists. This has to stop. She can't keep terrorizing us like this. That evening, Tom and I sat in our living room, the broken windows boarded up, casting long shadows across the floor. The silence between us was thick, charged with anger and frustration. We can't live like this, Tom, I said, breaking the silence. We need to do something about your mom. Tom, looking exhausted, nodded. I know, Anna. I don't know what to do. I took a deep breath. What if we set a trap for her, catch her in the act? Tom looked at me, surprised. A trap? How? I leaned forward, my mind racing. We could pretend to go away for a few days. Make it seem like the house is empty. If she's bold enough to break a window, she might try to come in again. Tom's eyes narrowed as he considered it. And then what? We catch her red-handed. Exactly. We could set up cameras, maybe even get the police involved, I suggested, feeling a surge of hope. Tom was silent for a moment, then nodded slowly. Okay, let's do it. But we need to be careful. If she suspects anything, we won't let her suspect. We'll be smart about it, I assured him. The next day, we started our plan. We made a show of packing our car, talking loudly about a weekend getaway for anyone who might be listening. Mr. Jenkins, ever the observant neighbor, wished us a good trip over the fence. Thanks, Mr. Jenkins. We'll be back in a few days, I called out, waving. Once we were sure Marlene could have seen or heard about our departure, we drove around the block and parked our car in a friend's garage. Then, we snuck back to our house as night fell, careful to stay out of sight. Inside, we set up cameras in the main rooms and made sure everything was locked up tight. We turned off all the lights and waited in the dark, the silence around us almost deafening. This is crazy, Tom whispered at one point, his voice tense. Yeah, but it's necessary, I whispered back, clutching his hand for reassurance. Hours passed, and just when I started to doubt Marlene would show, we heard a faint noise at the back door. My heart raced as we watched the camera feed on Tom's laptop. There she was, Marlene, fiddling with the lock. Beside her was Ray, looking around nervously. I can't believe she's actually doing this, Tom hissed under his breath. Shh! Wait for it, I said, my eyes glued to the screen. The door creaked open, and they stepped inside, Marlene leading the way. They didn't notice the camera, too busy looking around for things to steal. Okay, let's call the police now, I said, reaching for my phone. Tom nodded, his face a mask of mixed emotions. Yeah, let's end this. I dialed 911, my voice steady as I explained the situation. The operator assured us officers were on their way. We watched as Marlene and Ray rummaged through our stuff, anger and disbelief churning inside me. But I knew this was it, the moment we'd catch them and finally put an end to this nightmare. Minutes later, we heard the sirens, and soon the police were at our door. Marlene and Ray's shock was almost satisfying as the officers handcuffed them. The cold evening air was thick with tension as the police cars' lights painted our quiet street in shades of blue and red. Marlene and Ray, handcuffed and being led away, looked like two animals caught in a trap. The neighbors, drawn out by the commotion, watched from their front yards, a mixture of curiosity and concern etched on their faces. Marlene's voice, shrill and indignant, shattered the night's calm. "Tommy, you can't do this to me. I'm your mother, for God's sake." Tom, standing firm beside me, his hand gripping mine as if for support, replied with a voice that trembled slightly, "Mom, it's not about what I can or can't do. It's about what you did. Breaking into our house, threatening us. You left us no choice." Ray, the usually silent and brooding figure, spat out his words with venom. "You think you're all high and mighty now, huh? Calling the cops on your own family? This ain't over, boy." Officer Martinez, a stern-looking woman with an air of no-nonsense about her, stepped in front of them. "That's enough. You are both being charged with breaking and entering, and harassment. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." As she continued to read them their rights, a sense of surrealism washed over me. I glanced at the faces of our neighbors, their expressions ranging from shock to pity, and felt a pang of embarrassment. This was not how I envisioned our life in this quiet neighborhood. Once the police cars had driven away, leaving behind a trail of whispers and murmured gossip, Tom and I retreated to the privacy of our living room. The broken window, with its jagged edges glistening in the moonlight, stood as a grim reminder of the night's events. We stood there for a while, holding each other, finding comfort in the silence. It was a moment of peace amidst the chaos, a reminder that despite everything, we were not alone. "Let's fix this window first thing tomorrow," Tom finally said, pulling back slightly to look at me. "I want to leave tonight behind us. Start fresh." I nodded, feeling a sense of determination rising within me. "Yes, let's do that. Let's reclaim our home, our life. No more looking back." As we started cleaning up the glass, piece by piece, the enormity of what had happened began to sink in. We had confronted our nightmare, faced it head-on. It was a moment of closure, a turning point. Our life together had been tested, but we had emerged stronger, more united. The morning after the ordeal, Tom and I found ourselves sitting in the quiet of our kitchen, the early sun casting a soft glow through the windows. The events of the previous night seemed almost surreal, like a bad dream that we had finally awoken from. Tom, with a contemplative look, broke the silence first. "Well, looks like Mom's finally out of our lives for good this time," he said, a hint of relief mixed with sadness in his voice. I nodded, wrapping my hands around my coffee mug. "Yeah, after the threat of another prison term, I don't think she'll be bothering us again." "And Ray. I can't believe he was wanted for theft and robbery. Now he's facing a real prison sentence," Tom added, shaking his head. "It's a lot to process," I admitted. "But at least we can start to move forward now, put all this behind us." Tom leaned back in his chair, looking out the window. "I feel like a huge weight has been lifted off my shoulders. I just wish things could have been different, you know?" I reached across the table, taking his hand. "I know. But we did what we had to do. Now we can focus on us, our future." The conversation gradually shifted to lighter topics, plans for fixing up the house, and maybe taking that long-overdue vacation we had been talking about. It felt good to think about normal things again, to plan for a future that was no longer overshadowed by fear and uncertainty. Life has a funny way of flipping the script when you least expect it. I'm Ella, an economist by profession, and if you'd asked me a few years back, I would have said I had it all. A loving husband, Mark, a darling daughter, Lily, and a cozy home that was all ours. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let me take you back to where it all began, to the days filled with hope and plans for the future. It was a lazy Sunday afternoon, the kind where the sun lazily peeks through the curtains, and the smell of fresh bread from Mark's bakery fills the air. Mark was in the kitchen, his hands covered in flour, a look of concentration on his face that always made me smile. "Hey, Ella, can you grab the vanilla extract?" "It's on the top shelf," Mark called out, not looking up from his mixing bowl. I walked over to the pantry, reaching for the small bottle. "You know, you could put things where I can reach them," I teased, handing him the extract. Mark grinned, wiping his hands on his apron. "Where's the fun in that? I like it when you have to stretch." I rolled my eyes playfully. "You're impossible, you know that." "That's why you married me," he quipped, turning back to his dough. Lily, our 6-year-old, was sprawled on the living room floor, her coloring books spread around her. She was humming a tune, completely engrossed in her artwork. "Mommy, look! I'm drawing a picture of our family," she said, waving me over. "That's fantastic, Lily. Speaking of the bakery, Mark, have you thought about what we discussed? About maybe expanding?" I asked, a bit hesitant. Mark's expression changed slightly, a frown forming on his forehead. "Ella, we've been over this. The bakery is doing just fine as it is. Why mess with a good thing? But we could do so much more, you know, for Lily's future and maybe even get that house we've been dreaming about," I pressed on. Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know, Ella. I like the bakery the way it is. Small, manageable. I don't want the headache of a bigger place." I felt a twinge of frustration but decided not to push it. Okay. I just think we should think bigger, that's all." Mark shrugged, a hint of irritation in his voice. "Maybe. Let's just enjoy today, okay? No more talk about expanding." I nodded, not wanting to ruin the day. "Sure, Mark. Let's enjoy our Sunday." As the day wound down, I couldn't shake off a feeling of unease. Mark and I had always been a team, dreaming and planning together. But lately, it felt like we were on different pages, especially when it came to ambition and our future. As days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, the once lighthearted banter between Mark and me began to lose its charm. The bakery, once a symbol of our shared dreams, had become a stagnant reminder of what could have been but wasn't. I was busy climbing the ladder at my company, while Mark seemed content with the status quo. That's when the first cracks started to show. One evening, I came home from a particularly grueling day at work, my mind swirling with numbers and projections. Mark was in the living room, feet propped up, scrolling through his phone. The bakery had closed early, and he hadn't bothered to pick up Lily from school. My mother had stepped in, as she often did these days. "Mark, you were supposed to pick up Lily today. I had a meeting, and I couldn't make it," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Mark didn't look up. "Oh, was that today? I forgot. Sorry." "Forgot? Mark, this is becoming a habit. You need to step up," I said, frustration creeping into my tone. Mark finally looked up, annoyance flashing in his eyes. I said, "I'm sorry, Ella. What more do you want? I'm not the only parent here." That stung. I took a deep breath, trying to rein in my temper. "It's not just about picking up Lily, Mark. It's about us, about our future. Don't you think we should be doing more? For her, for us." Mark shrugged, an indifferent expression on his face. "We're doing fine, Ella. Why are you always pushing for more? Can't you just be happy with what we have?" I sat down, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. "I am happy, Mark. But I also want more for our daughter, for our family. Is that so wrong?" Mark stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "You know what, Ella? I'm tired of this. Every day, the same lecture about wanting more. I'm going to my mom's. And just like that, he grabbed his keys and left, leaving me alone with my thoughts and a growing sense of dread. This wasn't the first time he'd run to his mother, Susan, whenever we had a disagreement. It was becoming his go-to move, and I was left to wonder where I stood in this marriage. The next day, I received a call from Susan, and her tone was anything but friendly. "Ella, what's this I hear about you and Mark fighting again? You're pushing him too hard. He's happy with his bakery, why can't you be?" Susan's voice was sharp, accusatory. I clenched the phone tighter, trying to remain calm. "Susan, I'm just thinking about our future, about Lily's future. Mark and I need to be on the same page." "Well, maybe your page is the problem, Ella. You're always wanting more. Mark is a simple man, and you knew that when you married him," Susan retorted. I felt a flash of anger. "Simple doesn't mean stagnant, Susan. I'm trying to build a better future for all of us." Susan scoffed. "You're just being ungrateful and greedy. Mark is doing his best. You should appreciate that." The conversation ended shortly after, with no resolution in sight. I hung up, feeling more alone than ever. Trouble hit like a freight train, and it hit hard. Mark's Bakery, once the center of our small community, started to lose its charm and customers. Bills piled up, and the once cozy bakery felt more like a sinking ship. I was pulling extra hours at work, trying to keep us afloat, but it felt like bailing water out of a boat with a hole in it. One evening, I came home to find Mark slumped at the kitchen table, a stack of bills in front of him. His face was a picture of defeat. "Mark, what's going on?" I asked, a sinking feeling in my stomach. He looked up, his eyes tired and red. "The bakery, Ella. I can't keep it running anymore. We're bleeding money." My heart sank. "What are we going to do? We have Lily to think about." Mark ran his hands through his hair, a gesture of frustration I'd become all too familiar with. "I don't know, Ella. I really don't. I never thought it would come to this." I sat down beside him, trying to process the news. "Well, maybe it's time to consider other options. You could look for a job, at least until we figure things out." Mark's expression hardened. "A job? What? And work for someone else? I'm a business owner, Ella, not some office drone." I tried to keep my voice calm. "Mark, this isn't about pride. It's about our family, about making ends meet." He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I don't need a lecture, Ella. I know what's at stake." And with that, he stormed out of the room, leaving me with a pile of unpaid bills and a head full of worries. The next day, I decided to talk to Susan, hoping she might be able to get through to Mark. I dialed her number, my hands shaking slightly. "Susan, it's about the bakery. Mark's really struggling, and I think he needs to consider looking for a job," I said, trying to sound diplomatic. "A job? My son is not going to work for someone else. He's a business owner, Ella." "He's better than that," Susan snapped. I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my frustration in check. "Susan, the bakery is closing. We have bills to pay, a daughter to raise. This isn't about being better than anything. It's about survival." Susan scoffed. "Survival? You always exaggerate, Ella. Mark will figure it out. He doesn't need to stoop to being an employee." The conversation went nowhere, and I hung up feeling more helpless than ever. Mark's refusal to face reality, combined with Susan's delusional support, was a recipe for disaster. That night, Mark and I sat in silence, the tension between us thick enough to cut with a knife. I wanted to scream, to shout, to shake some sense into him, but I knew it would be pointless. The closure of the bakery brought more than just financial strain, it tore at the very fabric of our family life. Mark, once a bustling business owner, now spent his days idly lounging around the house. I'd come home exhausted from work, only to find dishes piled in the sink, laundry undone, and Lily left to her own devices. One evening, I arrived home later than usual, my head throbbing from a day crammed with meetings. The house was in disarray, and the sight of Mark on the couch, beer in hand, watching TV, was the last straw. "Mark, what the hell? Look at this place. Can't you at least tidy up a bit?" I snapped, my patience wearing thin. Mark looked up, unfazed. "Oh, come on, Ella. I'm not your maid. And I had a rough day." I was flabbergasted. "Rough day? Doing what, Mark? You've been sitting here all day." He shrugged, taking another swig of his beer. "I'm dealing with stuff, okay? It's not easy losing your business." I threw my bag down, frustration boiling over. "And you think it's easy for me? Working all day to keep us afloat while you do nothing?" Mark stood up, his face a mask of anger. "I'm not doing nothing, Ella. I'm trying to figure things out." "Figure what out, Mark? How to avoid responsibility? We have a daughter, for God's sake," I retorted, my voice rising. He shot back, "Don't you think I know that? I don't need you nagging me every day." The argument escalated, with harsh words and accusations flying back and forth. Lily, hearing the commotion, came into the room, her eyes wide and scared. "Mommy, Daddy, please stop yelling," she pleaded, her voice small and shaky. We both fell silent, the anger dissipating as we looked at our daughter. Mark muttered something under his breath and walked out, leaving me to comfort a crying Lily. The days that followed were a blur of silent meals, curt exchanges, and an ever-widening gulf between us. I was struggling to keep it together, juggling work, household chores, and caring for Lily, while Mark seemed to retreat further into his shell. The tension in our house had become a constant, like some unwelcome guest who had overstayed their welcome. But nothing prepared me for what came next. It started with small amounts of cash disappearing from my purse. At first, I thought I was just being forgetful, but then the amounts grew larger. One evening, after noticing another missing 50, I confronted Mark. He was in the living room, as usual, eyes glued to the TV. "Mark, have you been taking money from my purse?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't look at me. "What? No, why would I do that?" I felt a surge of anger. "Because it's missing, Mark. And I know I didn't spend it." Mark finally turned to face me, his expression defensive. "Look, I needed some cash, okay? It's not a big deal." I was incredulous. "Not a big deal? It's stealing, Mark. From your own wife." He stood up, his voice rising. "I don't need a lecture, Ella. I took a bit of cash for beer. It's not like I'm blowing it on something stupid." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Beer? You're stealing money for beer? While I'm working day and night to keep this family together?" Mark's face hardened. "Yeah, beer. It's not like I have much else to enjoy these days." I felt a mix of anger and sadness. "That's your excuse? I'm out there busting my back, and you're here drinking away our money." Mark scoffed. "Oh, please. You're always so dramatic. It's just a few bucks." I took a deep breath, trying to calm down. "This isn't just about the money, Mark. It's about trust. How can I trust you if you're stealing from me?" Mark didn't answer, just turned back to the TV, effectively ending the conversation. The next day, I made a decision. I called Susan to talk about the situation. "It's about Mark. He's been taking money from my purse. For beer," I said, trying to keep my emotions in check. Susan laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Oh, Ella, you're making a mountain out of a molehill. He's just having a tough time right now." I couldn't believe her response. "Susan, he's stealing from me. How can you just brush that off?" Susan's tone was dismissive. "He's your husband, Ella. What's yours is his. Besides, it's just a bit of cash." I felt a flash of anger. "Just a bit of cash? That's not the point, Susan. He's not contributing anything, and now he's taking what little we have left. Susan was unyielding. Well, I don't see the problem. He needs to unwind. You're being too hard on him. I hung up, realizing that talking to Susan was pointless. She was never going to see things from my perspective. One morning, I woke up to find Mark's side of the bed empty. That wasn't unusual these days, but as hours turned into a full day without a word from him, worry started to set in. I called his phone repeatedly, but it went straight to voicemail. Finally, after a week of silence, I heard the front door open. Mark walked in, looking different. There was an unfamiliar air of confidence about him. He wasn't alone. His mother, Susan, strutted in behind him with a smug look on her face. "Mark, where the hell have you been?" "I've been worried sick," I exclaimed, a mix of relief and anger washing over me. Mark looked at me, a smirk on his lips. "Oh, Ella, always so dramatic. I have news." I was confused. "News? What news?" He pulled out a lottery ticket, waving it in front of me. "This, my dear Ella, is our ticket out. I won, Ella. I won $10 million. My heart skipped a beat. "What? How?" Susan chimed in, her voice dripping with condescension. "He bought a lottery ticket with your credit card. Looks like it was a smart investment, after all." I was stunned, my mind racing. "My credit card? You used my credit card without asking?" Mark's smirk grew wider. "Well, I needed something to cheer me up after all the nagging. And look, it paid off." The reality of the situation hit me like a ton of bricks. He had taken my card, bought a lottery ticket, and won. It was almost too much to take in. "But, Mark, that's our money, then." "We won," I said, still trying to process the news. Mark's expression turned cold. "No, Ella. I won. And with this money, I'm starting a new life. Without you." I felt as if the floor had been pulled from under me. "What are you saying?" He was blunt, his words cutting deep. "I'm saying I'm leaving you, Ella. I'm tired of this life, tired of you. I want a fresh start, and now I can afford it." Susan laughed, a cruel sound that made my skin crawl. "Oh, Ella, you really thought you were so smart, didn't you? But you see, you've underestimated my son. He's a winner, and you're just left with nothing." Mark grabbed a suitcase he had apparently packed earlier. "I'm moving in with Mom. You can keep the house and whatever else. I don't need it anymore." Reeling from Mark's departure and his shocking betrayal, I knew I had to act fast. The first thing I did was call a lawyer, Mr. Jacobs, a no-nonsense man who had a reputation for being tough and fair. "Mr. Jacobs, my husband won the lottery with a ticket he bought using my credit card, and now he's leaving me and taking everything," I explained, my voice shaking with emotion. Mr. Jacobs listened intently, his voice calm and steady. "All right, Ella. Let's meet tomorrow. We'll go over everything, and I'll see what we can do." The next day, I sat in Mr. Jacobs' office, poring over bank statements and the credit card transaction that showed the purchase of the lottery ticket. "Based on this, we have a strong case," Mr. Jacobs said, his eyes scanning the documents. "The ticket was bought with your money, which means you have a claim to the winnings." I felt a glimmer of hope. "So, what's our next step?" "We file for a court injunction to freeze the lottery winnings until this is sorted out legally. Then we prepare for a court battle," he replied, his tone determined. The court day arrived faster than I had anticipated. Mark and Susan were there, smug looks on their faces, as if they had already won. My heart was pounding as I took my seat, Mr. Jacobs beside me. The judge, a stern-looking woman, called the court to order. Mr. Jacobs presented our case with clear, concise arguments, emphasizing the transaction and my contribution to our family's finances. Mark's lawyer tried to argue that the ticket was a separate entity from our marital assets, but Mr. Jacobs countered effectively, showcasing the joint nature of our finances and Mark's lack of contribution. Then, it was time for Mark to take the stand. His lawyer asked, "Mr. Johnson, did you use your wife's credit card to purchase the lottery ticket?" Mark replied, with a hint of arrogance in his voice, "Yes, but it was just a stroke of luck. It has nothing to do with her." "And what were your intentions with the winnings?" his lawyer continued. Mark glanced at me before answering, "To start a new life. I was tired of being underappreciated and belittled." I felt a surge of anger but remained silent. It was my turn to testify. Mr. Jacobs asked me, "Mrs. Johnson, can you tell the court about your financial contributions to your household?" I took a deep breath. I've been the primary breadwinner for the past few years. I paid the bills, took care of our daughter, and even supported Mark's mother financially. The judge listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes. After both sides presented their cases, she called for a recess before making her decision. The wait was agonizing. When we were called back in, the judge looked at both of us before delivering her verdict. Considering the evidence and the circumstances, I rule that the lottery winnings are a joint marital asset. Therefore, I award 3/4 of the winnings to Mrs. Johnson and 1/4 to Mr. Johnson. Mark's face was a picture of shock, and Susan's smugness had evaporated. I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. It was more than just a legal victory, it was justice. Life after the courtroom drama was like stepping onto a new path, one filled with possibilities and new challenges. My priority was Lily and rebuilding our lives with the winnings that I had fought so hard for. The money was invested wisely, ensuring a stable future for us. Meanwhile, I heard through the grapevine that Mark and his mother, Susan, had blown through their share on frivolous entertainment and were now left with nothing. One day, while running errands, I bumped into Mark. He was a shadow of his former self, unshaven, clothes rumpled, and an air of defeat hanging around him. "Ella, look at what you've done to me. I'm broke, in debt, and they're taking the house," he blurted out, his voice tinged with desperation. I looked at him, feeling no sympathy. "Mark, you did this to yourself. You and your mother couldn't handle the money, and now you're paying the price." He scowled, bitterness seeping through his words. "So, you're just going to gloat? See me suffer?" I shook my head, my resolve firm. "I'm not gloating, Mark. I'm just living my life. You made your choices, and I made mine." He tried to interject, but I cut him off. "You know, Mark, you and your mother never forgave me for taking what was rightfully mine. You spent your share without a thought for the future. That's on you." Mark's face twisted with anger, but there was a hint of regret in his eyes. "You could have shared more. You could have." I interrupted him. "I could have what, Mark? Bailed you out after you betrayed me? After you and your mother laughed in my face? No. I've moved on." He stood there, defeated, as I walked away. In that moment, I realized how far I had come. I had faced betrayal and heartache, but I hadn't let it break me. Instead, I built a better life for Lily and me, a life built on hard work and smart choices. Hey, there, I'm Marie, a 54-year-old who teaches French from home. My life's pretty simple: give lessons, record them, and enjoy the little things. I've got a son, Thomas, a real hard worker in trade, and his wife, Emma, who's 28 and, well, let's say, easy on the eyes. One typical Sunday, they came over for lunch. I had made my usual spread: roast chicken, some veggies, and a nice apple pie for dessert. Thomas, always the first to compliment my cooking, said, "Mom, this chicken is amazing. You've outdone yourself." Emma, fiddling with her hair, replied without much interest, "Yeah, it's good." She was more concerned with checking her reflection in the spoon than eating. I couldn't help but notice her perfect makeup and the way she kept adjusting her hair. As I passed the gravy, I tried to start a conversation with her. "Emma, dear, I saw this ad for a makeup workshop. Thought it might interest you since you love that stuff." She gave me a look, half surprised, half annoyed. Marie, I don't just like makeup, I live for it. It's not just a hobby, it's a necessity. Her tone was a bit sharp, like I had said something wrong. Thomas jumped in, trying to lighten the mood. Mom, Emma's just passionate about her looks. It's her thing, you know? I shrugged. Sure, I get it. But don't you think it's a bit much? All these creams and masks? Emma snapped her napkin down. Look, Marie, I need to look good. I can't let myself go and look old and tired. That's not me. I was taken aback by her bluntness. Well, there's nothing wrong with aging naturally, dear. Look at me, I'm proud of my age. She rolled her eyes. That's you, Marie. I'm not going to let myself look old. No way. The tension was thick, and Thomas tried to change the subject. Hey, let's not get into this now. Mom, tell us more about your students. We moved on, but Emma's words stuck with me. Her fear of aging seemed more than just a concern for beauty. It was almost like a deep-seated fear, something that drove her every action. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was going to lead somewhere unexpected. As they left, Emma barely said goodbye, too busy checking her phone for who knows what. Thomas gave me a hug and whispered, "Don't worry about Emma, Mom. She's just intense about her looks." I watched them drive off, thinking about Emma's obsession with her appearance. Little did I know, this was just the tip of the iceberg. A few weeks after that Sunday lunch, Emma came over to drop off some tools Thomas had forgotten. The house was a bit of a mess. I was in the middle of a lesson prep, but hey, family's family. "Hey, Emma," I greeted her. "Come on in, sorry for the mess." She stepped in, her eyes darting around like she was inspecting the place. "Oh, it's cozy," she said, in a tone that felt like she meant the opposite. While she waited, I noticed she was constantly touching up her face with a compact mirror and some powder. "You know, Emma, you really don't need all that makeup. You're naturally pretty." She snapped the compact shut, a bit annoyed. "Marie, I don't think you get it. This isn't just about looking pretty. It's about not getting old, not looking like a hag." Her words caught me off guard. "Hag? Emma, that's a bit harsh. There's more to life than just looking young." She huffed, "Easy for you to say. You've given up on trying to look good." I felt a sting at that comment. Given up? No, Emma, I just don't see the point in fighting the inevitable. We all age. It's natural. Emma leaned in, her voice tense. "Well, I won't just sit back and let age ruin me. I won't." I tried to reason with her. "But Emma, this obsession of yours, it's not healthy. Have you thought about talking to someone about it? Like a therapist?" Her reaction was instant and sharp. "Therapist? Are you calling me crazy?" "I'm not crazy, Marie. I just don't want to look old and wrinkled, that's all." The tension was palpable. I decided to change the subject. "Okay, let's not argue. Tell me, how's everything else going? How's work for Thomas?" She calmed down a bit. "Thomas is fine. Busy as always. But he doesn't understand. He thinks I'm overreacting about my looks." I nodded, trying to be supportive. Men sometimes don't get these things. But Emma, there's a difference between taking care of yourself and being consumed by fear of aging. She looked away, her eyes distant. "You don't understand, Marie. Since I was a kid, I was always told to look my best, to not let myself go. It's been drilled into my head." I saw vulnerability in her then, something I hadn't noticed before. "I see. That must have been hard. But Emma, you're more than your looks. You're a smart, capable woman." She gave a half-hearted smile. "Thanks, Marie. But in this world, looks matter. A lot." As she left, I watched her go, her every step seemed to be measured, perfect. It was clear that this obsession with her appearance was deep-rooted, something that had been ingrained in her from a young age. I just hoped she'd come to see that there was more to her than just her looks. One rainy afternoon, while I was sorting out some old French lesson plans, the doorbell rang. It was Emma, looking more frazzled than I'd ever seen her. Her eyes were red, and it looked like she had been crying. "Emma, what's wrong?" I asked, ushering her in. She flopped down on the sofa, her hands shaking a little. "Marie, it's a disaster. Look at this." She pointed to her hair where I could barely see a couple of gray strands. "And this." She gestured towards a minuscule wrinkle on her forehead. I tried to calm her down. "Emma, it's just a few grays and a tiny wrinkle. It happens to everyone." She looked at me like I was speaking another language. "Just a few grays? Marie, this is the beginning of the end. I can't look old, I just can't." Her reaction seemed so over the top. "Emma, everyone ages. It's not the end of the world." But she was in full panic mode. "You don't understand. If I start looking old, Thomas might leave me. He could find someone younger and prettier." I shook my head. "Thomas isn't like that. He loves you for who you are, not just for how you look." She wasn't listening, though. "No, I need to fix this. I need treatments, salon visits, maybe some Botox. But it's so expensive." Then came the part one wasn't prepared for. She turned those teary eyes on me. "Marie, I need your help. Can you lend me some money for these treatments? I'm desperate." I was taken aback. "Emma, I can't just give you money for that. It doesn't seem right." She grabbed my hands, her voice almost pleading. "Please, Marie, I'm begging you. I need this. Without it, I'm nothing." Her words struck a chord in me. Here she was, a young woman so scared of aging that she was willing to beg for money for cosmetic treatments. It was heartbreaking, in a way. I sighed, feeling a mix of pity and concern. "Okay, Emma. I'll help you. But only with a few treatments. And you can't tell Thomas about this." She hugged me, relief flooding her face. "Oh, thank you, Marie. You're a lifesaver. I promise I'll pay you back." I wasn't sure how I felt about the whole thing. Part of me felt like I was enabling her obsession, but another part couldn't stand to see her in such a state. I just hoped I was doing the right thing. As she left, her steps were a little lighter, but the worry in my heart grew heavier. I wondered if I had just opened a door that should have stayed closed. But I pushed those thoughts aside. After all, I was just trying to help, right? Several months had passed since I first agreed to help Emma with her cosmetic obsession. I hadn't seen her for a while, as she'd been busy with her treatments. When she rang the doorbell one sunny afternoon, I was in for a shock. There she stood, looking like a completely different person. Her lips were much fuller, unnaturally so, and her skin had a glossy, almost plastic-like sheen. "Emma, my God, what have you done to yourself?" I couldn't hide my shock as I ushered her into the living room. She strutted in, almost theatrically, flipping her hair back. "Do you like it, Marie? I got my lips done, and this new skin treatment makes me look years younger, don't you think?" I was struggling to reconcile this new appearance with the Emma I knew. "Younger? Emma, you look. It's too much. You were already beautiful, but this is like you're trying to be someone else." She plopped onto the couch, seemingly pleased with herself. "That's the whole point, Marie. I can't be looking the same all my life. I need to evolve, stand out." "But Emma," I began, my voice heavy with concern, "this isn't just evolving. You're changing your entire appearance. It's not natural." She got up and walked over to the mirror, admiring her reflection with a self-satisfied smile. "Natural is old-fashioned, Marie. In today's world, you have to be bold to get noticed. And Thomas, he's all for it. I raised an eyebrow in doubt. Really? Thomas is okay with all of this? He doesn't think it's too much. She hesitated, her eyes darting away from the mirror for a moment. Well, he was a bit taken aback at first, but he'll come around. He has to. I tried to reason with her. There's a fine line between self-care and completely altering how you look, Emma. You're crossing that line. Her gaze hardened as she faced me. Crossing the line? Marie, it's my life, my body. I decide where the line is. I let out a sigh, feeling a mix of frustration and concern. But where does this end, Emma? More and more procedures? You're losing the essence of who you are in all of this. She let out a laugh, a bit too sharp, a bit too loud. Losing myself? No, Marie, this is me finding myself. Becoming who I was meant to be. And I've never felt better. I watched her, a sense of sadness and worry taking hold of me. This wasn't just a case of vanity or a simple desire to look good. Emma was on a dangerous path, one that seemed to be spiraling out of control. Emma, I said softly, there's a beauty in accepting who we are, in aging gracefully. Don't you see that you're beautiful without all these artificial changes? She looked at me, almost pityingly. Marie, that might work for you, but not for me. I can't afford to just age gracefully. I need to be more, to look more. As she gathered her things to leave, her every move seemed calculated, as if she was performing on a stage. I couldn't help but wonder if I'd made a mistake by enabling her. I had hoped to offer her support, but instead, had I just fueled her descent into this obsession? She left with a breezy goodbye, her confidence seeming to fill the room even after she was gone. I was left with a heavy heart, pondering over the situation. How had a simple desire to maintain youth turned into an all-consuming chase for an unattainable ideal? And more importantly, what could I do to help Emma find her way back, to realize that true beauty lies in being comfortable in one's own skin? The questions lingered, but the answers felt far out of reach. The day Emma came with that outrageous demand, I was in the middle of recording a French lesson. The doorbell interrupted my flow. There she was, Emma, looking more frantic than ever. Marie, we need to talk. It's urgent, she said, barging into the house without waiting for an invitation. What's going on, Emma? You seem all worked up, I asked, forgetting to pause the recording equipment. She started pacing, her hands fidgeting nervously. I need more, Marie. The treatments, the surgeries, it's not enough. I found a surgeon, top-notch, but he costs a bomb. I need 10 grand. I felt my heart sink. 10 grand? Emma, are you out of your mind? You don't need more work done. Look at yourself. She spun around, her eyes blazing. Not enough? Marie, you don't get it. This is about survival for me. You promised to help, now cough up the money. I stood my ground, disbelief mixing with anger. Help? I said I'd help with your little beauty treatments, not fund your damn obsession. You're going overboard. She got right in my face, her voice laced with venom. You'll give me that money, Marie, or you'll regret it. I recoiled, shocked. Threats now, Emma? What the hell are you gonna do? Her voice dropped to a hiss. I'll make sure Thomas hears all about this. How you pushed me into this mess. You think he'll take your side? I couldn't believe her audacity. You think you can blackmail me? My own son knows better than to believe such crap. She sneered. We'll see, won't we? Give me the money, or I'll turn your life to hell. With that, she stormed out, leaving me in a state of shock. The room felt suddenly empty, the air heavy with the residue of our heated exchange. I sat there, my mind racing. Had I inadvertently fueled her madness? It was only after a few minutes that I realized the recording was still on, capturing every word of our exchange. A part of me was glad there was proof of her madness, her threats. But another part was terrified. This recording could change everything. It could protect me, or it could rip my family apart. I was caught in a whirlwind of emotions, unsure of my next move. It was about a week after Emma's wild demand for money when things took an ugly turn. I was busy in the kitchen when I heard Thomas's car screech to a halt outside. He came storming in, his face twisted in anger. "What the hell, Mom? Why'd you hit Emma?" Thomas demanded, slamming his fist on the kitchen table. I was completely thrown off. "Hit Emma? Thomas, what are you talking about?" He was practically shaking with fury. "She's in the hospital, says you smacked her. She's had surgery, spent a fortune, and she's pointing her finger at you." My mind reeled. "Hit her? That's crazy talk, Thomas. I'd never lay a finger on her. She's lying through her teeth." Thomas was pacing like a caged animal, his hands balled into fists. "Explain this to me, Mom. Why would Emma spin such a tale? She's scared out of her wits." I struggled to piece my thoughts together. "Listen, Thomas, she showed up here, demanding 10 grand for more plastic surgery. I said no. She's probably cooked up this story to cover her tracks." He stopped pacing, his eyes boring into mine. "But why, Mom? Why the hell would she need to lie? She said you've been in on this beauty stuff from the start." I was adamant. "I helped her with some small stuff, not this crazy surgery business. She's lost it, Thomas, and she's dragging me into her mess." He leaned against the kitchen counter, a deep frown creasing his forehead. "I don't get it, Mom. She's my wife. Why would she lie? You're my mother. This is messed up beyond belief." I reached out, trying to connect with him. "I know it's hard, but I'm telling you the truth. Emma's off the rails with this obsession, and she's spewing lies to get her way." Thomas jerked his hand away, his face hard as stone. "I need some time, Mom. This is too much to wrap my head around." As he turned to leave, the weight of the situation hit me like a ton of bricks. My own son, torn between believing his mother or his wife's twisted lies. The house felt colder, emptier. "I need proof, Mom." "Proof of your words," Thomas said, his voice cold, before he walked out the door. The house was eerily quiet after Thomas's demand for proof. My mind raced as I dug out the recording of my conversation with Emma. It felt like my last hope to clear my name and show Thomas the truth. When he arrived later that day, the tension was palpable. Thomas entered, his eyes wary and his jaw set tight. "All right, Mom, you said you have proof. Let's hear it then." I nodded, feeling a mixture of anxiety and determination. "Sit down, Thomas. This is going to be hard to listen to." He sat stiffly on the edge of the couch, arms crossed, a skeptical look on his face. I played the recording. Emma's voice echoed through the room, demanding money for cosmetic surgery, her threats chillingly clear. Thomas's face was a mix of disbelief and horror as Emma's words filled the room. "I need that money, Marie. Or else, I'll make sure Thomas hates you for it." As the recording ended, the room fell into a heavy silence. Thomas's expression was unreadable for a moment, then his face crumbled. "Jesus, Mom. I can't believe it. She lied, all this time," he said, his voice barely a whisper. I reached out, touching his hand. "I didn't want to believe it either, Thomas. But I couldn't let her lies tear us apart." He looked up, his eyes haunted. "She sounded so manipulative. How could I not see this? I thought I knew her." I sighed, feeling a surge of empathy for him. Sometimes, we see what we want to see, especially in the people we love. Thomas got up, pacing the room, a storm of emotions playing across his face. "I've been a fool, haven't I? Defending her, believing her over my own mother." "You're not a fool, Thomas. You're just human," I reassured him. He stopped, turning to face me. "What do I do now, Mom? My marriage is based on a lie. My wife, the person I trusted most, she's a stranger. I stood up, taking his hands in mine. You're strong, Thomas. You'll get through this. It's going to be hard, but you're not alone. I'm here for you. He nodded, a flicker of determination in his eyes. I need to confront her, sort this mess out. She needs help, serious help. And I need to find a way to move on. Weeks had rolled by since the whole mess with Emma blew up. It was a somber autumn afternoon when Thomas came over. He looked like he'd been through the ringer, a shadow of his usual self. We sat in my cozy living room, the air thick with unspoken thoughts. Thomas broke the silence, his voice rough with emotion. Mom, I had it out with Emma. It was brutal. I leaned forward, bracing myself. What happened, Thomas? He rubbed his face, tired lines etched deep. She confessed, finally. Broke down, sobbing, begging for forgiveness. But I couldn't do it, Mom. I couldn't forgive her. My heart ached for him. You've been through so much, Thomas. He nodded, a bitter laugh escaping him. Yeah, a real roller coaster. I've filed for divorce. It's over. I also told her she needs to cough up that 10 grand she blew on surgery. Said I'd sue her if she didn't. The finality in his voice was like a punch to the gut. That's tough, Thomas. But you're doing the right thing. He stared out the window, lost in thought. I know. But it's hard, you know? She was my life, and now, it's like I don't even know her. I reached out, touching his arm. It's okay to feel lost right now. But you'll find your way, I know it. Thomas took a deep breath, a semblance of resolve returning to his eyes. I need to start over. Maybe take some time off, travel a bit. Clear my head. Sounds like a good plan, I encouraged, feeling a glimmer of hope for him. He stood up, a determined look on his face. Yeah, it's time to move on. Thanks, Mom, for everything. As he left, I felt a mix of relief and sadness. The whole situation with Emma had been a storm, tearing through our lives, leaving a trail of hurt and betrayal. But it also brought clarity, a harsh lesson in truth and deception. The house felt quiet after he left, a silence that spoke of endings and beginnings. I sat there for a long time, thinking about all that had happened, about the twists and turns life throws at you. Emma's deception had been a harsh blow, but it also opened our eyes. Thomas was on his way to healing, to finding a new path. And I, in my own way, was too. Hi, there, I'm Linda, a 53-year-old who's pretty much seen it all. Living off the interest from some stocks I was lucky enough to invest in, life's been comfortable, if not a bit too quiet at times. My husband, David, works his tail off as a department head at some insurance company. He's the kind who brings his work home, always on the phone or buried in papers. Then there's our son, Ethan, sharp as a tack and a lawyer to boot. A year back, he married Sarah, a nurse with a smile that could light up a room, but there's something about her that just rubs me the wrong way. They've been living with us since they got hitched. Honestly, I thought they'd have moved out by now, but here we are. The house feels smaller these days, if you know what I mean. One evening, we were all sitting in the living room. Ethan was fiddling with his phone, Sarah was knitting something that was probably meant to be a scarf, and David was half watching the news, half asleep. So, Mom, Ethan started, putting down his phone. I think it's time we started looking for our own place. I almost jumped out of my seat. Well, it's about time. I'll help you look. A nice little house, maybe near the park. But Sarah cut in, actually, Linda, I was thinking. I really like it here. It's cozy, and well, we save a lot on rent. Her voice was sweet, too sweet. It sounded fake. I glanced at David, expecting him to back me up, but instead, he surprised me. Yeah, Linda, let them stay. It's nice having the house full. I frowned. David, they're grown-ups. They need their space, and frankly, so do we. David shrugged. I don't mind them here. Besides, Ethan, you're saving for that fancy car, right? Staying here helps with that. Ethan looked uncomfortable, glancing at Sarah, who was now smiling at her knitting like it was the best thing in the world. Look, I don't want to be a burden, Ethan mumbled. Bah, you're no burden. David waved his hand. Right, Linda? I sighed, feeling outnumbered. Fine. Stay if you must. But don't blame me if you start feeling cramped. Sarah looked up, her eyes too bright. Oh, Linda, you're the best mother-in-law ever. Her words felt like syrup, thick and too sugary. I forced a smile, but inside, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. David, always so keen on having our own space, suddenly doing a 180? And Sarah, always polite, but something about her eagerness seemed off. Lately, I've been feeling run down, like all my energy's just drained away. Getting out of bed feels like a chore, and I'm tired all the time. It's not like me at all. I used to be the first one up, bustling around the house, but these days, I can barely muster the strength to get through the day. It was a typical Thursday evening. Ethan was working late, and David had his weekly poker game, leaving just Sarah and me at home. She was in the kitchen, humming as she always does, preparing our evening tea. I sat at the dining table, listlessly flipping through a magazine, feeling too exhausted to even stand up and join her. Here's your tea, Linda, Sarah said cheerfully, placing a steaming mug before me. I made your favorite chamomile. I managed a weak smile. Thank you, dear. But as soon as I took a sip, I frowned. The tea was bitter, unusually so. Sarah, does this taste bitter to you? I asked, pushing the mug away slightly. She took a quick sip from her cup and then from mine, her eyebrows knitting together in confusion. It tastes fine to me, Linda. Maybe your taste buds are playing tricks because you're not feeling well. I wanted to believe her, but something didn't sit right with me. The next day, I decided to bring it up with David. He was in the kitchen, a rare sight, making himself a sandwich with an almost comical level of concentration. Sipping my coffee, I ventured, David, have you noticed anything strange about the tea Sarah makes? It tasted bitter to me. He paused, sandwich halfway to his mouth, and looked at me as if I'd just said the sky was falling. Bitter? What do you mean? Her tea is always perfect. Are you sure you're not just imagining things because you're feeling sick? His reaction was so intense, so immediate, it took me aback. No, I'm certain it was bitter. It's been like that for a few days now. He put his sandwich down, his eyes narrowing. Linda, it's probably just your illness talking. Sarah's tea is fine. In fact, it's more than fine, it's the best I've had. His defense of Sarah's tea was so fervent, so passionate, that it left me speechless. Was I really imagining it? But no, the bitterness was real, I was sure of it. That evening, when Ethan came home, he seemed worn out, the stress of his job written all over his face. Sarah, ever the attentive daughter-in-law, brought in a tray of tea, saying, "This will help you unwind." Ethan took a sip and then another, making no comment about the taste. It seemed to me like he didn't notice anything off. I tried my tea again, and sure enough, it was bitter. I couldn't understand why I was the only one tasting it. "Doesn't this taste bitter to you, Ethan?" I asked, hoping for some validation. He shook his head. "Tastes normal to me, Mom." Sarah just smiled and said, "Maybe Linda's right, and it's just her feeling under the weather." But I wasn't convinced. Why was the tea bitter only for me? And why was David so quick to dismiss my concerns? There was something odd going on, and I was determined to find out what it was. The mystery of the bitter tea had turned my home into a scene straight out of a detective show. Determined to uncover the truth, I decided to keep a close eye on Sarah, especially when she was preparing our evening tea. With Ethan at work and David out for the day, it was the perfect opportunity to do a bit of sleuthing. I positioned myself at the kitchen table with a magazine, pretending to be engrossed in an article. Out of the corner of my eye, I watched Sarah bustling around the kitchen. She had this way of moving, smooth and precise, like she knew exactly what she was doing. Today, her movements seemed even more calculated. As she reached for the tea canister, her eyes darted around, ensuring she was alone. It was then I saw her slip a small vial from her pocket and discreetly add a few drops into the tea meant for me. My heart skipped a beat. So, I was right all along. I waited for her to leave the kitchen. The moment she stepped out, I sprang into action, swapping the mugs with a swift, careful motion. The adrenaline was pumping through my veins. I felt like a secret agent in one of those spy movies Ethan loves. Returning to my seat, I tried to appear calm as she came back, handing me the special tea with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Here you go, Linda. Enjoy." I nodded, my hands trembling slightly. "Thank you, Sarah." We sipped our tea in silence. I watched her, pretending to take small sips from my cup. Soon, her eyes began to droop, a clear sign the sleeping agent was taking effect. Within minutes, she was slumped over the table, fast asleep. I was in shock. My daughter-in-law, whom I had welcomed into my home, was drugging me. But why? My mind was racing with questions. I knew I had to act quickly while she was still asleep. Cautiously, I searched her purse and found the vial. The label read, "Strong Sleep Aid, prescription only." My hands shook as I held it. This was serious stuff, not something you'd find at the local drugstore. Now the question was, what to do next? Do I confront her when she wakes up? Or should I call Ethan? But what would I even say? "Hey, your wife's been drugging your mother." It sounded absurd, and yet it was the reality. I glanced at Sarah, still fast asleep, and realized I needed evidence, something concrete before making any accusations. I started with her phone. I know, not the most ethical move, but desperate times call for desperate measures. I felt like a cat burglar as I tiptoed over to where her phone was charging on the kitchen counter. My hands were shaking as I picked it up, half expecting it to explode or something. The phone was unlocked, which was lucky for me. I went straight to her messages, and that's when my heart nearly stopped. There, clear as day, was a string of messages between Sarah and my husband, David. My David. And let me tell you, they weren't chatting about the weather or what to have for dinner. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut as I read those messages. They were planning something terrible. The words blurred before my eyes, but the gist of it was clear: they were having an affair. And not just that, they were plotting against me. David had insured my life and, together with Sarah, planned to stage a car accident to cash in on the policy. My own husband and daughter-in-law, scheming right under my nose. I must have been standing there for ages, just staring at the phone in disbelief. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway snapped me out of it. It was Ethan, coming home from work. I shoved the phone back on the counter, my mind racing. What was I going to do? Confront them right then and there? No, I needed to be smart about this. I needed proof, solid proof. Ethan walked in, looking tired but happy to be home. "Hey, Mom, what's up? Why's Sarah asleep at the table?" I forced a smile, feeling like my world was crumbling around me. Oh, she wasn't feeling well. Decided to take a little nap. Ethan raised an eyebrow but didn't question it further. Okay, weird, but alright. I'm gonna go freshen up. After he left the room, I went back to Sarah's phone. I needed evidence, something I could use to expose this whole twisted plot. I started taking pictures of their messages with my phone. My hands were shaking so bad, the photos were all blurry, but I managed to get a few clear ones. Then I heard Sarah stirring. I quickly put her phone back and pretended to be busy in the kitchen. My heart was pounding so loud, I was sure she could hear it. Sarah groggily sat up, rubbing her eyes. What happened? Why am I asleep?" I turned to face her, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. You must have been really tired, dear. You fell asleep right at the table. She looked confused but didn't question it further. Oh, okay. That's strange. I nodded, keeping my face as neutral as possible. Yeah, strange. As I watched her stumble out of the room, a million thoughts raced through my head. How was I going to confront David and Sarah about this? What was I going to tell Ethan? My family, my whole life, felt like a lie. Armed with the screenshots from Sarah's phone, my mind was set. I had to confront David. This wasn't just about a fling or a misguided crush, they were plotting against me. My hands were shaking, but this time with anger, not fear. David walked in later that evening, looking as calm as ever. Seeing him act so normal boiled my blood. I was in the kitchen, pretending to be busy with dinner, but my mind was on one thing only, confrontation. Hey, Linda, David greeted casually as he hung his coat. Something smells good. What's for dinner? I took a deep breath, my heart pounding. We need to talk, David. Now. He looked surprised but nodded, following me into the living room. What's going on, Linda? You look upset. I threw the screenshots down on the table in front of him. Upset? That's an understatement. Care to explain these? David's face went from confused to pale as he picked up my phone and scrolled through the messages. Linda, I can explain. Explain? Explain how you and Sarah are planning to betray me? How you're having an affair right under my nose? My voice was shaking with rage. He tried to reach for my hand, but I pulled away. Linda, it's not what it seems. Please, let me explain. I snorted in disbelief. Not what it seems. It's pretty clear to me. You're cheating on me with my son's wife. And there's more, isn't there? What are you planning, David? What are these messages about drugging me? David's eyes darted around, looking for an escape. It's complicated, Linda. You wouldn't understand. Try me, I said, my voice icy. I think I deserve at least that much. He ran a hand through his hair, sighing. It started as a fling. We didn't mean for it to go this far. But then, things got out of hand. Out of hand? You call drugging your wife and plotting behind her back just out of hand? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. David looked down, unable to meet my eyes. I'm sorry, Linda. I never meant to hurt you. Sorry doesn't cut it, David. This is unforgivable. I felt a mix of anger, betrayal, and heartbreak. I trusted you, and you were planning to. What? Get rid of me. He didn't answer, just sat there, looking guilty as sin. Where's Ethan? Does he know about this? The thought of our son being involved in this mess was too much. David shook his head quickly. No, Ethan doesn't know anything. This was just between me and Sarah. Just between you and Sarah. I repeated, the words tasting bitter. I need to think. I can't be around you right now. I grabbed my coat and keys, heading for the door. David tried to stop me, but I brushed past him. Don't. I can't even look at you right now. I didn't know where I was going, but I needed space, needed to breathe. The walls of the house felt like they were closing in on me. As I drove, the tears started to flow, blurring my vision. My life, as I knew it, was falling apart. After I had gathered my thoughts at the park, I knew it was time to face the music. My phone buzzed with a call from Ethan, his voice tinged with worry. Mom, where are you? Sarah's frantic, and Dad looks like he's seen a ghost. What's happening? I sighed, feeling a knot in my stomach. Ethan, we need to talk. It's about your father and Sarah. Can you meet me at the park? The urgency in my voice must have hit him. I'm on my way, Mom. When Ethan arrived at the park, his face was etched with concern. I didn't beat around the bush. I showed him the screenshots from Sarah's phone. His reaction was a mix of disbelief and anger. This can't be true. Dad and Sarah, he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. It's hard, I know. But we need to confront them, together, I said, my voice steady. Ethan's jaw clenched as he nodded. Let's go back home. The drive back was tense, each of us lost in our turbulent thoughts. As we walked into the house, David and Sarah were sitting together, looking like they were bracing for a storm. Ethan, usually so calm and collected, was the first to break the silence. How could you both do this? To Mom, to me. Sarah's face crumbled, tears spilling over. Ethan, I'm sorry, I never meant for any of this. Save your apologies, Sarah. They mean nothing now, I interjected, my voice cold. David stood up, his face pale. Linda, please, let's talk about this. I can explain. I shook my head, the evidence burning a hole in my pocket. Explain? You betrayed me, our son, our family. There's no coming back from this. Ethan's voice was laced with betrayal. And you, Sarah, my wife, involved in this deceit. Sarah reached out to Ethan, but he recoiled. Don't touch me. I can't even stand to look at you. It was then that we heard the front door open. We all turned to see two police officers entering the house. David's and Sarah's faces went from fearful to outright terrified. They knew their secret was out, and the consequences were here to face them. The officers approached them, their expressions stern. David and Sarah, you need to come with us. There are serious allegations against you both. David's voice was barely a whisper. Allegations? What allegations? I stepped forward, holding up my phone. These allegations. Betrayal, plotting, deceit. As the officers handcuffed them, the look of terror on David's and Sarah's faces was something I'll never forget. It was the look of people who realized their world had just crumbled. The house felt eerily quiet after David and Sarah were taken away by the police. Ethan and I sat in the living room, the weight of the day's events pressing down on us. Ethan broke the silence first. Mom, how are you holding up? I mean, after everything. I sighed deeply, the events of the day replaying in my mind. I'm not sure, Ethan. Betrayed, angry, confused, a bit of everything, I guess. How about you? He leaned back, rubbing his temples. It's like a bad dream, Mom. I can't believe Sarah and Dad. It's just too much to take in. I reached over, giving his hand a reassuring squeeze. We'll get through this, Ethan. It's going to be tough, but we're strong. We can handle it. He nodded, a determined look crossing his face. Yeah, we've got each other, at least. That counts for something. I smiled, feeling a surge of maternal pride. It counts for a lot, Ethan. We're a team, you and I. We spent the next few hours talking, really talking, about everything we'd been through. It was a conversation long overdue, one filled with honesty and raw emotions. We shared our feelings of betrayal, our fears about the future, and our hopes for what was to come. I've been thinking, Mom, Ethan said after a pause. Maybe it's time for some changes. For both of us. I nodded in agreement. Changes like what? Maybe start with the house. It feels tainted now. Maybe we should sell it, find somewhere new to start fresh. The idea was both scary and exciting. That's a big step, but you might be right. A new beginning could be good for us. And what about you, Mom? What will you do now? Ethan asked, concern in his eyes. I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of determination rising within me. I think I'll start by rediscovering who I am, apart from your father. Maybe pick up some old hobbies, find new interests. I've always wanted to try volunteering, maybe at the community center. Ethan smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. That sounds great, Mom. And I'll be here for you, whatever you need. I felt a warm glow at his words. And I'm here for you too, Ethan. Always. We sat there for a while longer, talking about the future, about the possibilities that lay ahead. It was the first time in a long time that I felt a sense of hope, a belief that things could get better. As the day turned into evening, Ethan stood up. I should probably head out, give you some space. I stood up too, hugging him tightly. Thank you, Ethan, for everything. I don't know what I'd do without you. He hugged me back, just as tightly. You'll never have to find out, Mom. I'll always be here. After he left, I sat back down, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. The road ahead was uncertain, but I knew I wasn't alone. I had Ethan, and I had a newfound strength within me. After the whirlwind of the trial and the divorce, I found myself starting anew. The divorce was hard, but David had to pay a significant amount for the physical and moral harm he had caused. Both he and Sarah were facing real jail time. I had moved into a small, charming apartment in a quiet part of town, a place where I could start over. Ethan visited often, and on one bright Saturday afternoon, he came over to help me with my new project, setting up a small garden on my balcony. He was elbow-deep in potting soil, planting some herbs. You seem to be doing really well, Mom, he commented, looking around at my new place. I smiled, watering a small tomato plant. I am, Ethan. It's been tough, but I'm finding my way. And the volunteering at the community center is really fulfilling. He smiled back, clearly relieved. That's great to hear, Mom. After everything, you deserve to find some happiness. We worked together in comfortable silence for a while, enjoying the simplicity of the task. Then Ethan said, I'm thinking about trying to date again. It's time to move on, you know? I nodded, pleased for him. Just take it slow, Ethan. And remember, honesty is key in any relationship. As we finished with the garden, Ethan stood and stretched. I'm really proud of you, Mom. You've come through so much. I stood up too, feeling a sense of accomplishment. Thanks, Ethan. You've been my rock through all of this. He hugged me tightly. Always, Mom. You're not just my mom, you're one of the strongest people I know. Looking out over the balcony at the city below, I felt a wave of contentment wash over me. The past months had been some of the hardest of my life, but they had also shown me my own strength.